This is the Sony FX6. They've been teasing it for a while, but now it's finally here. Sony invited us down to their office in Pinewood a few months ago actually for a socially distanced sneak peek at the camera, and I've got to say, it's really impressive. It completes Sony's new cinema lineup of cameras with the Venice and the FX9 sitting above it. But what sets the FX6 apart from those cameras is its size. It's based on the FS5's handheld form factor, but it's surprisingly capable because it has the insides of the new A7S Mark III. In fact, picturing the FX6 as an A7S Mark III but inside an FS5 body is actually not a bad way at all to describe this camera. The sensor is the same full-frame 4K 10.2 megapixel back-illuminated CMOS sensor as in the A7S Mark III. So dynamic range should be similar between the two cameras. Plus there's the same processors inside, which is an interesting side note, is actually 4 times more processing power than the FS5 Mark II had. So the combination of the same processors and the same sensor as the A7S Mark III means we have the same max frame rates. 4K UHD can go up to an impressive 120 frames a second, or in 1080p you get 240. This time though, we can record DCI 4K at up to 60p, which the A7S can't do. Another big change from the A7S Mark III is that Sony are now officially saying that the FX6 has 2 sensitivity options, ISO 800 and ISO 12800. However, Sony do actually seem a bit hesitant to call it a dual native or dual base ISO, as they say that in order to use the term dual base, they expect the noise performance to be pretty much the same at both values, whereas here the 12800 is understandably noisier. But to be honest, from testing quite a few dual native ISO sensors over the last few years, including some from Sony, you will often see that the higher value does have quite a bit more noise. So I don't really think that's a big deal. I think I would still call it a dual native ISO. I'm not sure why Sony won't. The benefit is though that as you go up through the ISO values, you'll see those noise levels dramatically drop down and dynamic range get that little bit better than it normally would be at ISOs this high. And from what I can tell on the FX6, this change seems to happen at around 10,000 ISO. Now, although the A7S Mark III doesn't officially have a dual native ISO, in testing we have seen exactly what I just described. So it's not clear what the difference here is between the two cameras and their sensors in this aspect and why Sony are calling one having 2 sensitivities and one doesn't. Hopefully they'll clear that up a bit in time. But one thing is for sure, you should expect the low light performance of the FX6 to be just as good as the A7S Mark III, which is a big deal. The A7S line has always found a home in some fairly large productions as a specialist low light camera. And now productions like that will have an option in a true video body, instead of having to use a mirrorless form factor. Plus the FX6 gives you the option to control your in-camera noise reduction. So you could easily argue that it will actually outperform the A7S Mark III for professional video work in low light because of that. And you can keep all your detail in high ISO scenes without in-camera noise reduction affecting it, and you can apply your own noise reduction in post after the fact and fine-tune it to get it just right. The codecs will be much more familiar to productions as well, especially if they're used to FS7 and FX9 footage, as the FX6 uses the same XAVC-I and XAVC-L formats in their MXF wrapper, as opposed to the slightly less professional MP4 wrapper which the A7S Mark III uses. These files are recorded onto dual SD card slots, which can also use the new CF Express Type A cards. Now this is the same system as we saw on the A7S Mark III. The card slots are physically shaped so that you can use either media type in the same card slot, which is a very neat design. If you need higher quality recordings than 10-bit XAVC, the SDI port on the back is actually a 12G SDI, capable of outputting uncompressed 16-bit RAW up to 60 frames a second. And at first glance, this is very similar to what we saw from the FS5 Mark II, as that also surprised everyone at the time by being able to output RAW over its SDI port. However, this is an even better 16-bit raw out, like you'd get from the XDCA back on the FX9. So it should be much better quality than the FS5's raw output, which was 12-bit. The camera's physical ergonomics are very clearly based on the FS5 form factor, which is no bad thing at all. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that this is one of my favourite camera designs physically. It's very comfortable to use handheld indeed because of the rotatable hand grip and the LCD screen, which you can put wherever you want on the camera. It's not as suitable to go on the shoulder as the FX9 is though, although it is still better than some other options out there on the market because you can easily take the hand grip off and relocate it with third-party accessories. Now most of this will feel very familiar to you if you've used the FS5 before. The hand grip is pretty much exactly the same, except it uses a different connector. The LCD screen has the same mounting system as the FS5, but it's the same screen as the FX9. And it comes with an LCD hood rather than the long viewfinder loop of the FX9, but because it's the same screen, that loop will work with the FX6 as well if you already own one or want to buy one separately. The top handle though has had a big redesign, giving you much more control when holding the camera that way. There's a new assignable dial, joystick, and some more assignable buttons. Perhaps my favourite part of the physical design though is the electronic variable ND filter. It's exactly the same here as it is on the FX9, and it's such a fantastic system. Once you get used to using it, it really can be quite tricky to go back to a camera with a normal wheel of optical filters at preset values. If I could take this built-in ND system and just put it on every camera in the market, I absolutely would. We also, of course, need to mention autofocus. It's the same fantastic hybrid AF system as we're used to now from the A7S Mark III and the FX9. Sony have done such a great job with adding this to their professional video lineup. If you're coming from an FS7 and an FS5, this will make a big difference to your work. Being able to rely on face tracking for interview shots and piece to cameras like this one, or just simple continuous autofocus for fast B-roll work, it makes such a difference, especially in the kind of fast-paced handheld work that this form factor really excels at. There's no in-camera sensor stabilization. That's one feature we still haven't seen transition across from the mirrorless alpha lineup. However, you do get the gyro data recorded alongside your video clip, just like on the FX9. So if you bring your footage into Sony's Catalyst Browse software when importing, you can use that to apply stabilization, which is incredibly fast and actually remarkably good. It's definitely more effective than simply using the warp stabilizer functions in Premiere or in Final Cut or Resolve. Plus, another nice touch if you're using that workflow is that there is a new clip flag button right there on the side of the camera, which will let you tag clips as good or bad while you are filming, and then you can see that in Catalyst Browse, which should speed up your post-production. So, it's early days of course for this camera. Over the next few months we will definitely spend a lot more time with it, I'm sure, but on first impressions, it really does seem like Sony have just hit the ball out of the park with this one. Fantastic ergonomics, high frame rates, professional autofocus and stabilization in post, the variable ND, the raw output, codecs that broadcasters are familiar with. I mean, the list just goes on and on. The FX6 really does take the best bits of the FX9 and the best bits of the A7S Mark III and combine them in one camera, which I'm sure will be a very popular choice for people. Pre-orders have started now over at proav.co.uk, so if you think the FX6 is the right camera for your work, then please do get in touch with our sales team who can get you on that pre-order list. For now though, let me know what you think of the FX6 in the comment section down below. Are you as impressed as I am? Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.